September 19th, 1944. 7:30 in the morning. A thick blanket of fog rolled across the fields near Arracourt in eastern France, reducing visibility to less than 100 yards. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams sat in the turret of his Sherman tank, call sign Thunderbolt, scanning the grey wall of mist ahead. Somewhere out there, German panzers were advancing. His tankers could hear them before they could see them, the distinctive rumble of heavy engines growing louder through the haze. The ground trembled beneath the tracks of machines that outweighed and outgunned everything the Americans had. When the first dark shapes materialized from the fog, the American gunners opened fire. At ranges so close they could have thrown a baseball at the enemy. 75mm shells slammed into the flanks of Panthers that had stumbled blindly into American guns. Steel sparked against steel. Ammunition detonated inside enemy turrets. 11 German tanks burned that morning, their crews dying in machines that were supposed to be invincible. The vaunted technological superiority of German armor meant nothing when the enemy could not see you until you were already behind them. This was the moment when American tankers proved that tactics, training, and terrain could defeat supposedly invincible machines, not through suicidal charges, not through overwhelming numbers alone, but through disciplined maneuver, combined arms, coordination, and the hard-won wisdom purchased in blood from North Africa to Normandy. The M4 Sherman, so often dismissed as inferior, so often mocked as a death trap, became in the hands of experienced crews a weapon capable of destroying any tank the Germans could field. But to understand how American tankers developed these tactics, we must first understand the terrifying mathematics they faced when German heavy armor appeared on the battlefield. We must understand what it felt like to look through a periscope and see a Tiger tank for the first time, knowing that your gun could not hurt it and its gun could not miss you. The Tiger one was a monster built for a single purpose, destroying enemy tanks from ranges where they could not fight back. Weighing 57 tons, it carried 100mm of hardened steel on its front hull and turret. The upper hull sides and turret sides were protected by 80mm of armor, though the lower hull sides were only 60mm. The armor was mounted almost vertically, relying on sheer thickness rather than slope to defeat incoming rounds. British testing on a captured Tiger at the School of Tank Technology in late 1943 revealed that this German steel was approximately 13% more resistant than equivalent British plate, making the protection even greater than the raw numbers suggested. A Tiger's frontal armor could stop virtually anything the Allies could throw at it in 1943 and remained formidable through the end of the war. The Tiger's main weapon was the fearsome 88mm KWK-36 gun, a weapon derived from the legendary Flak 36 anti-aircraft gun that had terrorized Allied tanks since the first encounters in North Africa. Firing standard Panzergranate 39 armor-piercing ammunition, the 88 could penetrate 132mm of steel at 100 meters and still punch through 99mm at 1,000 meters. The gun's accuracy was extraordinary. German tankers claimed kills at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. The recoil mechanism absorbed the tremendous forces so smoothly that the gunner could track his fall of shot and correct without losing the target. Against a Sherman's frontal armor, roughly 90 to 100mm of effective protection when slope was considered, the Tiger could achieve a killing hit at 1,500 to 2,000 meters or beyond. At those ranges, the Sherman appeared through German gun sights as barely more than a dot, yet the 88 could reach out and destroy it with a single round. The shell would punch through the frontal plate, ricochet around the interior, and kill or maim everyone inside. The crew would have no warning, no chance to respond. One moment, they were scanning for threats. The next moment, they were dead. The standard Sherman carried the 75mm M3 gun, a weapon originally designed for infantry support rather than tank killing. The army had prioritized a gun that could fire effective high-explosive rounds against fortifications, machine gun nests, and troop concentrations. Armor-piercing capability was secondary. Firing its best armor-piercing round, the M61, it could penetrate only 61mm at 500 yards, when striking armor angled at 30 degrees. Against the Tiger's frontal armor of 100mm, this gun was completely useless at any range. The shell would strike the German steel and shatter, leaving nothing but a silver splash of metal and a furious enemy crew now fully aware of your position. even against the thinner upper side armor of 80mm. Adjusted upward to roughly 92mm effective due to superior German metallurgy, the 75 was marginal at point-blank range. To have any chance of penetrating a Tiger's flank, a Sherman crew had to close to distances where the German gunner could not possibly miss. And during that approach, the Tiger's 88 could fire multiple rounds. At the rate of 6 to 8 aimed shots per minute, a Tiger crew could engage and destroy several Shermans before any of them reached killing range. The arithmetic was brutal and simple. A Tiger crew could sit comfortably at 1,500 meters and methodically destroy every Sherman that appeared, knowing that nothing those Shermans carried could hurt them. The American tankers had no offensive option in a frontal engagement. Their choices were to retreat, call for help from tank destroyers or aircraft, or somehow maneuver around the enemy to hit the thinner side and rear armor that their guns could actually penetrate. Retreat meant abandoning infantry, losing ground, and inviting pursuit. Calling for help took time that dying men did not have. Maneuver was the only real option, and it required exposing your tank to fire while crossing open ground. The 76mm M1 gun began reaching American units in France during Operation Cobra in July of 1944. This weapon offered significant improvement, penetrating 93mm at 500 yards. It could threaten Tiger side armor at moderate ranges but remained inadequate against the front except at suicidally close distance. When Eisenhower learned that even the 76mm could not reliably penetrate Panther frontal armor, he was furious. "Why is it that I am always the last person to hear about this stuff?" he demanded. "Ordnance told me this 76 would take care of anything the Germans had." The Supreme Commander had been misinformed. His tankers were paying for that misinformation with their lives. The 2nd Armored Division reported after combat that the 76 could only penetrate Tiger frontal armor at point-blank range. Point-blank range against a Tiger meant being close enough that the German gunner could not possibly miss, close enough that his 88mm shell would strike your tank within a fraction of a second of firing, close enough that you would probably die before you got the shot off. The real solution was a special round called HVAP, High Velocity Armor Piercing, which used a dense tungsten carbide core surrounded by a lightweight aluminum body to achieve extraordinary velocity and penetration. This ammunition could punch through 157mm at 500 yards and 135mm at 1,000 yards. HVAP could defeat a Tiger frontally at roughly 1,500 yards, nearly equalizing the engagement. But tungsten was desperately scarce, needed for machine tools across American industry, critical to the production of aircraft engines, and subject to allocation battles between competing military and civilian demands. Tank destroyer units received priority allocation for HVAP because their doctrine emphasized anti-armor combat. Most Sherman crews were lucky to carry 2 to 5 HVAP rounds, if they received any at all. Many received none. Tank commanders hoarded these precious shells, saving them for emergencies, never knowing if the next engagement would be the one where they desperately needed tungsten to survive. Only 18,000 total HVAP rounds in 76mm reached Europe by March of 1945, and over half were the 3-inch variant for M10 tank destroyers rather than Sherman ammunition. The British developed their own solution in the Sherman Firefly, mounting the powerful 17-pounder gun in a standard Sherman hull. This weapon could penetrate approximately 130 to 140mm at 500 yards, enabling frontal kills on Tigers at 1,700 to 1,900 yards. British testing at Lulworth specifically estimated the 17-pounder would penetrate the turret front and driver's visor plate of the Tiger at those ranges. The Firefly gave British tank troops a fighting chance in frontal engagements, though the conversion was recognizable by its longer barrel, and the Germans learned to target Fireflies first. The Firefly served with British and Commonwealth units throughout northwest Europe. American forces did not employ it, relying instead on tank destroyers and the scarce HVAP rounds. Every meter a Sherman had to close represented time under fire from a gun that could destroy it in a single hit. The 88's muzzle velocity, with standard ammunition, was approximately 773 meters per second. At 1,000 meters, the shell arrived less than 2 seconds after firing. There was no dodging, no taking evasive action, no chance to react. A Sherman crew facing a Tiger frontally was not in a tank battle. They were in an execution. The only hope was to get around the enemy, to strike the flanks where their guns might actually work. Flanking was not a tactical preference for American tankers. It was a survival imperative born of desperation and necessity. A common misconception holds that American Army doctrine prohibited tanks from fighting other tanks, leaving that mission exclusively to specialized tank destroyer units. The reality was more nuanced than either extreme suggests. Field Manual 17-10 from 1942 envisioned medium tanks primarily as exploitation and breakthrough forces targeting rear area installations. The manual specifically instructed armored units to avoid frontal assault against equal or superior hostile armored forces. Anti-armor operations were formally assigned to tank destroyer battalions under Field Manual 18-5. However, this did not mean tanks were prohibited from engaging enemy armor when necessary. Doctrine anticipated that tanks would encounter enemy armor and provided guidance for such engagements. The practical difference was one of mission emphasis rather than absolute prohibition. The primary mission of American tanks was infantry support and exploitation, rapid thrusts into enemy rear areas to disrupt supply lines, overrun headquarters, seize bridges, and sow chaos behind the front. The Sherman was optimized for this role, which is why the Army initially prioritized the 75mm gun with its excellent high-explosive round over the 76mm with its superior armor-piercing performance but weaker blast effect against infantry, and fortifications. A Sherman supporting an infantry advance needed to destroy machine gun nests, knock out bunkers, and suppress defensive positions. Tank destroyers were expected to handle massed enemy armor. The tank destroyer branch, established under Brigadier General Andrew Bruce, represented the Army's formal anti-armor philosophy. Bruce believed that massed enemy armor thrusts should be met by specialized units equipped with fast, lightly armored vehicles mounting the most powerful anti-tank guns available. These units would be held in battalion strength as a mobile reserve, then rushed forward to intercept and destroy German panzer formations before they could exploit a breakthrough. The M10 Wolverine, M18 Hellcat, and eventually the M36 Jackson each embodied this doctrine of speed over protection. The M10 mounted the 3-inch gun on an open-topped turret, sacrificing crew protection for reduced weight and improved gun depression. The M18 was the fastest-tracked armored fighting vehicle of the war, capable of 55 miles per hour on roads. The M36 carried the 90mm gun, the weapon that could finally match the Tiger on something approaching equal terms. The M36's 90mm gun could penetrate Tiger frontal armor at combat ranges. American tankers called it the can opener for good reason. At Pfuffendorf in November of 1944, when Shermans of the 2nd Armored Division could not penetrate Tigers frontally, both battalions sent back for the 90mm tank destroyers to come up. The tank destroyer crews knew their vehicles were vulnerable, with open turrets that offered no protection against artillery airbursts or infantry weapons. But they also knew their guns could kill anything on the battlefield. When employed in their intended role, tank destroyer units achieved remarkable results. The 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion claimed 39 kills for 4 losses at Arracourt. The 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion destroyed approximately 40 German tanks total during the Bastogne siege, with their most intense single day of combat coming on Christmas Day. The 823rd tallied dozens of kills across the entire campaign. These numbers reflect the devastating effectiveness of powerful guns in prepared positions or ambush situations. In practice, the doctrine of holding tank destroyers in reserve collapsed under operational reality. Massed German armored thrusts of the kind Bruce envisioned rarely materialized on the Western Front after the initial Normandy battles. Tank destroyer battalions were parceled out in platoon and company-sized elements attached to infantry divisions, useful but doctrinally heretical. They were employed as improvised tanks, clearing pillboxes, providing direct fire support against buildings, and performing missions that exposed their open turrets and thin armor to threats they were never designed to face. The real tactical evolution occurred at the platoon level, developed by sergeants and lieutenants learning through trial and terror what worked against German heavy armor. The standard American tank platoon consisted of 5 Shermans operating as a coordinated unit. This was the minimum tactical element deployed in combat. When engaging superior German armor, these crews developed a tactical method that was often described as swarming, but was more accurately understood as coordinated fire and maneuver. The core principle was straightforward in concept and harrowing in execution. One section of 2 to 3 tanks would engage the enemy frontally to fix it in place and draw fire. These tanks would use terrain for cover where possible, exposing only their turrets while keeping their hulls behind rises or in depressions. They would fire rapidly, not necessarily expecting to penetrate, but forcing the enemy gunner to respond to immediate threat. Every second the German spent engaging these tanks was a second he was not looking for the flanking element. Meanwhile, the other section maneuvered to the flank or rear to engage thinner armor. These tanks had to move fast across open ground, accepting the risk of exposure to reach positions where their guns could actually kill. The maneuver might take them through fields, between buildings, into woodlines, anywhere that terrain offered a covered approach to the enemy's vulnerable sides. The 2nd Armored Division documented that the tankers had used wide encircling movements, engaging the enemy's attention with one platoon of tanks, while another platoon attacked from the rear. This was not a suicide charge. This was disciplined, combined arms warfare executed under fire. It required exceptional coordination, communication, and trust between crews who knew that the fixing element was taking the greater risk, absorbing fire so their comrades could get the kill. Several specific tools made this possible. Smoke proved one of the most effective weapons against German heavy armor. The 75mm gun's white phosphorus round could blind German tank optics with dense white smoke that clung to the air and obscured vision for crucial minutes. The acrid fumes drawn into the fighting compartment through ventilation systems sometimes forced crews to abandon otherwise undamaged vehicles, unable to breathe or see their instruments. An intelligence bulletin describing fighting near Florence documented that 2 smoke rounds, followed by armor-piercing projectiles, were enough to force a Tiger to withdraw. The German crew could not engage what they could not see, and they knew that American tanks were maneuvering in that smoke, getting into positions where their guns would work. Discretion was often the better part of valor. This was actually one reason some commanders resisted the 76mm gun. It lacked a white phosphorus round, sacrificing this invaluable capability for improved armor-piercing performance that still could not reliably defeat German heavy armor frontally. Terrain exploitation proved equally critical. At Arracourt, American tanks occupied concealed defensive positions on commanding terrain and waited until German armor closed to effective range before opening fire. This completely negated the enemy's theoretical range advantage. A Tiger that could kill at 2,000 meters was no more effective than a Sherman at 500 meters when both tanks opened fire simultaneously at 500 meters. In the Normandy bocage country, dense hedgerows created a nightmare for armored operations. These ancient earthen barriers, often topped with thick vegetation, divided the countryside into thousands of small fields. Tanks climbing over these hedgerows exposed their thin belly armor to enemy fire and often stalled at the crest, presenting perfect targets. Anti-tank teams waited in adjacent fields, Panzerfaust rockets ready. Sergeant Curtis Culin of the 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron devised a solution by welding steel teeth cut from German beach obstacles to the front of his Sherman. This Rhino device allowed tanks to burst through hedgerows at speed rather than climbing over them. The tank would hit the hedgerow at full throttle, the steel teeth biting into the earthen bank, and plow through in a shower of dirt and vegetation. Around 500 sets were manufactured and fitted to American tanks before the breakout from Normandy. General Omar Bradley called it the best new idea of the war. Combined arms integration matured throughout the campaign. A coordinated engagement against heavy armor could involve field artillery, suppressing known positions, mortar or tank smoke, masking the approach, P-47 Thunderbolts attacking from above with bombs, rockets, and 50-caliber machine guns, infantry, identifying hidden positions and protecting tanks from close range, Panzerfaust teams, and M36 tank destroyers, providing the penetrating firepower Shermans lacked. No element was decisive alone. Together, they created a system that could overwhelm any defense. At Arracourt, when German tanks penetrated to Combat Command A headquarters, even M7 Priest, 105mm, self-propelled howitzers engaged panzers with direct fire at close range. Artillery pieces designed to lob shells in high arcs onto distant targets found themselves shooting straight at German tanks across open fields. Desperation drove innovation. The famous claim that it took 5 Shermans to kill 1 Tiger reveals more about organization than combat. As historian Stephen Zaloga explained, American tank platoons always operated with 5 tanks as a unit. That was the minimum tactical element deployed. You are not going to say, "Oh, it is only a Sturmgeschütz." "Hey, Joe, we do not need you and your buddy." The 5-to-1 ratio reflected standard platoon strength, not a required kill equation. British operations research analysed hundreds of tank engagements and found that required advantages varied dramatically depending on tank types, ranges, and conditions. A Firefly could engage a Tiger at near parity at close range, while a 75mm Sherman required significant numerical advantage at long range. The notion of a single fixed ratio oversimplifies the complex reality of armoured combat. The Battle of Arracourt, from September 18th to the 29th of 1944, stands as the largest American tank engagement on the Western Front before the Battle of the Bulge, and the clearest demonstration that superior tactics, training, and combined arms coordination could overcome German technological advantages. A critical clarification is necessary for historical accuracy. The German force at Arracourt consisted primarily of Panthers and Panzer IVs, not Tigers. The 5th Panzer Army, commanded by General Hasso von Manteuffel, entered battle with 262 armoured vehicles. These included 75 Panzer IVs, 107 Panthers, and 80 assault guns. Tiger presence was minimal or disputed in contemporary records. The American force was the 4th Armoured Division's Combat Command A under Colonel Bruce Clark, with Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams and his 37th Tank Battalion as its armoured corps. They fielded 75mm Shermans, vehicles that were grossly outmatched on paper by Panthers with their long 75mm KWK-42 guns and 80mm of sloped frontal armour, giving effective protection exceeding 120mm. What unfolded was a masterclass in tactical adaptation. Heavy morning fog on September 19th reduced engagement ranges to hundreds of meters, completely negating the Panthers' superior long-range gunnery. Combat Command. Tanks occupied concealed positions on local terrain elevations and waited in the mist. When the 111th Panzer Brigade's Panthers advanced blindly without adequate reconnaissance, assuming they faced scattered American rear echelon units, they exposed their flanks to waiting Shermans positioned in a semicircle of ambush. American crews destroyed 11 panzers on that first day of fighting at Arracourt. The Germans, shocked by the ferocity of resistance, regrouped and attacked again. The pattern repeated across 11 days. German armour attacked. Fog and terrain neutralized their advantages. Disciplined American fire and maneuver tactics inflicted devastating losses. When weather cleared, P-47s from the 19th Tactical Air Command added devastating close air support, their 500-pound bombs and rockets turning German tanks into burning hulks. The German crews were fresh from training depots. The 113th Panzer Brigade, formed on September 4th, just 14 days before the battle began, was essentially untested. Many of its tank commanders had never fought in combat. Many of the drivers had only weeks of experience with their vehicles. They advanced according to textbook tactics that assumed competent reconnaissance and coordinated support. They found instead a veteran American division that had been fighting since the beaches of Normandy. The 4th Armoured Division, by contrast, had crossed France in a series of lightning advances, fighting dozens of engagements against German rearguards. Its crews knew their vehicles intimately. Its commanders had developed intuitive understanding of terrain and timing. Crew quality proved more decisive than vehicle quality. Captain William Dwight served as a liaison officer during the battle, racing between units under fire to maintain coordination when radios failed. Captain Jimmy Leach commanded a tank company with aggressive skill, later becoming one of historian Zaloga's most important sources for reconstructing what actually happened at Arracourt. By battle's end, Germany had lost approximately 86 tanks destroyed, and 114 more damaged or broken down out of 262, leaving just 62 operational. The 5th Panzer Army's offensive capability was shattered. The 4th Armoured Division lost 25 tanks and 7 tank destroyers from Combat Command A, with total divisional losses of 41 medium and 7 light tanks for the month. The exchange ratio favored the Americans by nearly 3-1 in a battle where the Germans held every technological advantage. Major Charles Carpenter added a surreal footnote to the battle. Flying an unarmed L4 Grasshopper observation aircraft, normally used for artillery spotting, Carpenter had fitted 6 bazooka rocket tubes under the wings. When he spotted German armor, he dove his tiny fabric-covered airplane directly at the tanks and fired his rockets at point-blank range. He was credited with 6 confirmed tank kills across the entire campaign. His nickname was Bazooka Charlie, and his exploits became legend among the ground troops, who watched this madman attack tanks from a plane that had no business being anywhere near a battlefield. The trajectory from catastrophic inexperience to tactical mastery took roughly 2 years and cost thousands of American lives. Each lesson was paid for in burning tanks and dead crews. North Africa, in 1942 and 43, was the crucible. At Kasserine Pass in February of 1943, the 1st Armored Division attacked in parade ground formation against German positions and was destroyed piecemeal. The division advanced in neat lines across open ground as if on maneuvers, ignoring the terrain that might have offered cover. German anti-tank guns and panzers waited in concealed positions, opening fire when the Americans were fully exposed. Tiger Ones from Schwer Panzer Abteilung 501 were present in the broader offensive, fighting at Sidi Bou Zid and Faid Pass in the days before Kasserine. But the Tigers themselves did not fight at Kasserine Pass proper. Most American losses came from Panzer IVs and the devastating towed 88mm guns that could penetrate any American tank at ranges exceeding a mile. The shock of defeat galvanized the army. The immediate reforms were sweeping. General Lloyd Fredendall, whose incompetent leadership had contributed to the disaster, was replaced by George Patton. Combined arms training intensified, with tank crews practicing coordination with infantry and artillery until the movements became instinctive. Air-ground coordination was systematized, with forward air controllers accompanying ground units to direct fighter bombers onto targets. Within weeks at El Guetar in March, the army demonstrated rapid institutional learning. Infantry positioned in depth with centrally controlled artillery repelled German armor in the first clear American victory against panzers. The tactics that won at El Guetar were not sophisticated. They were fundamental. Infantry dug in. Artillery registered on likely avenues of approach. When German tanks appeared, concentrated shellfire broke up their formations. Infantry with bazookas and anti-tank guns finished off survivors. It was brutal, effective, and repeatable. Tiger losses in Africa revealed a pattern that would hold throughout the war. Of roughly 31 Tiger tanks delivered to the North African theatre, only 6 were confirmed killed in combat. The remaining 25 were abandoned due to mechanical defects, often triggered by minor combat damage, mine strikes, or aircraft strafing that damaged tracks or running gear. The Tiger's 57-ton weight made recovery extraordinarily difficult. Standard German recovery equipment could not tow a Tiger. 2 18-ton FAMO half-tracks were required for even basic towing operations, and these were themselves scarce and maintenance-intensive. If a Tiger threw a track in a combat zone, or if its engine overheated, or if any of 100 mechanical systems failed, the crew often had no choice but to destroy their own tank and retreat on foot. The Tiger killed enemies at incredible ranges, but it also killed itself through sheer mechanical complexity. Italy from 1943 to 45 amplified this pattern. Schwere Panzer Abteilung 508 arrived at full strength with 45 Tiger Ones by January of 1944, fighting at Anzio and through the Italian peninsula. In direct combat against Allied armor, Tigers were fearsome. The unit claimed 15 Shermans near Cisterna on May 23, 1944, for the loss of 1 Tiger. When Tigers could be positioned in prepared defensive locations with clear fields of fire and proper support, they were nearly unstoppable. But the campaign's mountainous terrain caused catastrophic non-combat losses. Narrow roads gave way under the Tiger's weight. Bridges rated for normal vehicles collapsed. Engine failures multiplied in the thin air of mountain passes. During the withdrawal to Rome on May 24th and 25th, the battalion lost 22 Tigers in just 3 days. Only 1 was from enemy action. 7 Tigers were blown up at Corrie by their own crews for lack of fuel. The Wehrmacht's logistics system could not keep these thirsty vehicles supplied during rapid retreats. 11 Tigers broke down near Giulianello, their engines or transmissions failing on the brutal Italian roads. 2 more simply failed mechanically and could not be recovered before American forces overran the area. The battalion commander, Major Hudell, was recalled to Führer headquarters and relieved of command for this disaster. Across the Italian theatre, of all Tigers deployed, only roughly 8 to 15% were destroyed by enemy fire. The rest were abandoned, broken down, or destroyed by their own crews during retreats. The Tiger was not just an engineering marvel. It was an engineering nightmare that devoured resources, demanded specialized support, and died more often from neglect than from enemy action. Normandy, from June to August of 1944, brought the fullest reckoning with German heavy armor, but primarily in the British sector around Caen, not the American sector. 3 heavy Tiger battalions operated in Normandy. They claimed hundreds of Allied tanks in direct combat. Yet this impressive ratio must be understood in context. German kill claims were systematically inflated by 30 to 50%, according to the Wehrmacht's own intelligence service, Fremde Heerost. Multiple crews often claimed the same kill. Damaged tanks that were later recovered and repaired were counted as destroyed. The fog of war made accurate counting nearly impossible. Cross-referencing German claims with actual Allied losses consistently confirms this inflation. American tankers in the bocage faced primarily Panthers and Panzer IVs. The German armor composition in Normandy was approximately a 2-to-1-to-1 ratio of Panzer IV to Panther to assault gun. Tigers were a small minority of the total armored force, yet American units consistently over-reported Tiger encounters. Among the Allied armies, units continually reported that Tiger tanks were in their sector or that they had destroyed Tiger tanks regardless of actual type. The boxy profile of a Panzer IV under battlefield stress looked close enough to a Tiger to fool frightened men peering through smoke and haze. Every German tank with a big gun became a Tiger in the telling. The myth fed itself. Historian Stephen Zaloga documented only 3 verifiable Tiger I encounters involving American forces across the entire European theatre of operations from 1944 to 1945. These included damaged Tigers on a train near Normandy in August 1944, a Tiger company during the Battle of the Bulge, and Tiger I versus Mu-26 Pershing engagements in April 1945. American tankers were far more likely to encounter a Panzer IV or Stug 3 assault gun than a Tiger. The Battle of the Bulge in December of 1944 and January of 1945 brought American forces their most significant Tiger encounters, but primarily against Tiger IIs, the King Tiger, not Tiger Is. Production of the Tiger I had ceased in August of 1944, as German factories switched to the heavier, more powerful successor. Kampfgruppe Peiper's Schwere SS Panzerabteilung 501 fielded roughly 30 Tiger IIs in the spearhead of the German offensive. At Stoumont Station on December 19th, the 740th Tank Battalion halted Peiper's advance in one of the most unlikely stands of the war. This unit had originally been trained as a CDL battalion, equipped with specialized searchlight tanks for night operations, but had been reconfigured as a standard medium tank battalion before the German offensive. When the attack crashed into the American lines, the 740th was hastily re-equipped, with repaired Shermans pulled from an ordnance depot. The crews had minimal training with their new vehicles. Many had never fought in tanks before. 3 Shermans destroyed the lead German vehicles at close range, blocking the narrow road through the village. The burning hulks created an obstacle that Peiper's column could not bypass. Precious hours were lost as German engineers attempted to clear the wreckage. American reinforcements rushed forward. At La Glaise, concentrated Sherman fire and artillery suppressed Peiper's heaviest armor. 1 Tiger II reportedly absorbed so many Sherman rounds that the entire crew became concussed from the repeated impacts, unable to continue fighting though their tank remained mechanically intact. Another had its cannon knocked off by a direct hit. The 88mm barrel sheared away by an impossibly lucky shot that rendered the tank useless as anything except an immobile pillbox. On December 24th, Peiper escaped on foot with 800 men, abandoning all vehicles. His unit had run out of fuel, run out of ammunition, and run out of options. American forces captured over 130 destroyed or abandoned German vehicles at La Glaise, including 6 King Tigers in the village proper, and a 7th nearby at Caux. Tiger 213 remains on display at La Glaise today, a monument to the high watermark of German armor in the West. The men who climbed into Sherman tanks, knowing these odds, displayed extraordinary courage every time they closed their hatches. They knew the mathematics as well as anyone. They climbed inside anyway. Lafayette Pool of Company 1, 32nd Armored Regiment, 3rd Armored Division compiled the most extraordinary combat record of any American tanker in just 81 days. From June 27th to September 19th, 1944, he was credited with 12 confirmed tank kills, 258 armored vehicles and self-propelled guns destroyed, over 1,000 enemy soldiers killed, and an additional 250 prisoners captured. He led 21 full-scale assaults as the spearhead tank, the most dangerous position in any formation, first to encounter the enemy and first to die if anything went wrong. His crew stayed together through 3 successive tanks, all named In the Mood, after the Glenn Miller song they played constantly. Corporal Wilbert Richards, known as Red for his red hair, drove with a touch that seemed to anticipate every shell hole and obstacle. Private First Class Bert Close, called Schoolboy for his youthful appearance, manned the bow machine gun. Corporal Willis Oller, called Groundhog for his ability to spot targets, worked the main gun with uncanny accuracy. Technician 5th grade Del Boggs, called Jailbird for reasons lost to history, loaded shells with practiced speed. Poole boasted that Oller could shoot the eyebrows off a gnat at 1,500 yards. Poole's tactics favored aggression over caution. Charge in close and mix it up, even against powerful opponents like the Panther. Speed and violence of action could overcome superior armor if you got inside the enemy's decision cycle, firing and moving before they could respond. His kills were primarily against Panthers and Panzer IVs, consistent with the documented rarity of Tiger encounters in the American sector. On September 19, 1944, near Munsterbusch in Germany, a Panther ambushed his 3rd in the Mood. The first German round missed, the second hit tipped the tank into a ditch. The impact killed a crew replacement, a young soldier who had joined only days before. Poole was blown from the commander's hatch by the force of ammunition cooking off inside the destroyed tank. His right leg required amputation below the knee. Poole refused to leave the army despite his wound, re-enlisting in 1948 and eventually serving as an instructor. He was twice recommended for the Medal of Honor by commanding officers who witnessed his exploits. He was twice turned down battlefield commissions because he would not leave his enlisted crew to become an officer. His philosophy captured the ethos of American tankers in the war. There were no heroes, no Rambos, he said. We were a team. Every medal I received, it was not me. It was my team. Creighton Abrams commanded the 37th Tank Battalion from the front, riding his Sherman Thunderbolt. He went through 7 tanks named Thunderbolt during the war, but never had one shot out from under him. Patton, who considered himself the finest tank commander in history, said of Abrams that he was supposed to be the best tank commander in the army, but he had one peer, Abe Abrams. He is the world champion. At Arracourt, when 2 of his tank companies were outflanked on September 20th and in danger of destruction, Abrams unhesitatingly attacked the enemy force with his command tank, striking with such ferocity that the enemy was thrown into a state of confusion. He personally killed multiple German tanks that day, leading from the very front in the tradition of cavalry commanders throughout history. During the relief of Bastogne on December 26, 1944, when a concealed anti-tank gun blocked the advance toward the besieged 101st Airborne Division, Abrams went forward in his own tank and destroyed it. Lieutenant Charles Bogus's lead tank, Cobra King, broke through to the airborne perimeter at 4:50 in the afternoon. The siege was lifted. Abrams survived the war and rose to become a 4-star general, serving as Army Chief of Staff during the difficult years of Vietnam. The M1 Abrams main battle tank, which replaced the Sherman's descendants in American service, bears his name. Trooper Joe Ekins of the 1st Northamptonshire Yeomanry delivered perhaps the war's most dramatic documented Tiger kills. On August 8, 1944, during Operation Totalize near Sintho in Normandy, Ekins fired 5 rounds from his Sherman Firefly's 17-pounder and destroyed 3 Tiger I tanks in approximately 12 minutes. One of those Tigers, turret number 007, carried SS Hauptsturmführer Michael Wittmann, Germany's most celebrated tank ace, with between 135 and 138 credited kills. Wittmann had terrorized Allied forces since North Africa, his reputation amplified by Nazi propaganda. His death in the wreckage of his Tiger passed almost unnoticed in the chaos of the battle. It was Ekens's first day firing his tank gun in combat. He only learned 8 years later whose Tiger he had destroyed. The psychological phenomenon known as Tiger phobia is well documented in Allied military records. Reports from North Africa through Northwest Europe consistently note that the mere rumor that troops were up against Tigers was often enough to spread panic. Soviet sources record T-34 units withdrawing from areas on mere suspicion of Tiger presence. Allied commanders prohibited soldiers from inspecting Shermans, destroyed by 88mm hits because the crews were prove, invariably badly mangled. Soldiers who saw the aftermath of Tiger kills often refused to climb back into tanks. The policy reduced immediate psychological trauma but fed the mystique of invincibility. German propaganda amplified the effect, publishing kill tallies for aces like Wittmann and describing Tigers as wonder weapons that would turn the tide of war. Every Tiger destroyed became proof of Allied superiority. Every Tiger success became proof of German invincibility. Both interpretations missed the point. The fear was wildly disproportionate to the actual threat frequency. Tigers represented only about 2.7% of total German tank production. Germany built 1,347 Tiger Is and 492 Tiger IIs out of roughly 50,000 armored fighting vehicles. The Panzer IV was the tank American crews actually encountered most often, with over 8,000 built as tanks. It was dangerous but not invincible. Its 75mm gun could kill a Sherman, but a Sherman could kill it in return. By April of 1945, Germany fielded approximately 90 tanks of all types on the entire Western Front, Panthers, Panzer IVs, and Tigers combined, against 11,000 American tanks and tank destroyers. The ratio was over 100-1 in Allied favor. A casualty survey of American tank losses in the European theater of operations found that 75mm guns accounted for roughly 36% of gunfire losses against Shermans. This indicates that the most common threats came from Panzer IVs and Stug 3s, firing 75mm rounds, not 88mm armed Tigers. The Tiger was real, lethal, and terrifying. But the war was decided by the unglamorous arithmetic of thousands of Panzer IVs, assault guns, and anti-tank guns against tens of thousands of Shermans, backed by overwhelming artillery, air power, and logistics. Mechanical reliability separated the Sherman from every German heavy tank. Panther operational readiness rates averaged around 50 to 55% over 1944, meaning roughly half of Panthers were broken down at any given time. Tiger readiness rates were actually somewhat better than often claimed, averaging around 45 to 55% during most periods. The Sherman's readiness rate was approximately 85 to 90%. In Sicily, of 17 Tiger Is deployed, 16 were self-destroyed or abandoned by their own crews. Not a single one was destroyed in combat. They killed themselves through mechanical failure and the impossibility of recovery. Crew survivability in the Sherman was the highest of any Allied tank. Spring-loaded hatches enabled rapid escape, and on average only 1 of 5 crewmen was killed per knocked-out tank. A destroyed Sherman meant 4 survivors who could man a replacement tank, bringing their hard-won experience to the new vehicle. The Polish 1st Armored Division documented that on average, per each 5 destroyed tanks, 1 tank crew was killed. The switch from dry to wet ammunition stowage dramatically reduced the dreaded brewing up, where Shermans exploded in flames. Dry stowage Shermans burned after penetrating hits roughly 60 to 80% of the time. Wet stowage variants, with ammunition surrounded by a water-glycerin mixture that suppressed ignition, burned only 10 to 15% of the time. Experienced crews survived to fight again. Production volume was the ultimate strategic advantage. The United States built 49,234 Shermans. Germany built 1,347 Tiger Is. Every Tiger lost was functionally irreplaceable by late 1944. Every Sherman lost could be replaced overnight from vast depot stocks. The 3rd Armoured Division entered Normandy with 232 Shermans. The division suffered 648, completely destroyed, plus 700 more knocked out and repaired, a cumulative loss rate exceeding 500%. Yet the division never stopped fighting. That industrial capacity was as much a weapon system as any gun or armor plate. The records compiled by researcher Ron Klages provide the most detailed picture of Tiger losses available. Of 1,718 total recorded Tiger losses across both marks, 40% were combat losses, 38% were non-combat losses, and 21% were unknown or unspecified. Among identifiable combat causes, only 80 Tigers across both variants were confirmed lost to other tanks from all nations combined. Anti-tank guns accounted for 49, aircraft accounted for 31, artillery accounted for 13. Infantry with bazookas and panzerfausts accounted for 11. The single largest category of combat losses, 495 Tigers, was listed simply as combat cause unspecified, reflecting the chaos of wartime record-keeping. Non-combat losses included 341 abandoned or irrecoverably immobilized, 260 mechanically failed, and 57 that simply ran out of fuel. The popular narrative of waves of Shermans swarming helpless Tigers through sheer numbers misses the essential truth. American forces almost never fought Tiger ones in the first place. The flanking tactics that became central to American armored doctrine were developed and employed primarily against Panthers and Panzer IVs. The 5-to-1 ratio is an artifact of platoon organization, not combat mathematics. The Sherman was not a death trap, but the most survivable Allied tank, backed by logistics and combined arms integration that no enemy could match. The true history is more compelling than the myth. It is the story of an army that entered its first major armored engagement at Kasserine Pass in parade ground formation and was routed, then won its first clear victory at El Guetar just weeks later. It is the story of crews who discovered that white phosphorus smoke could defeat tanks their armor-piercing shells could not penetrate. It is the story of Arracourt, where 75mm Shermans defeated Panthers technologically superior in every dimension through fog, exploitation, terrain mastery, and veteran tactical judgment. The men who fought in Shermans did not choose their equipment. They fought with what they were given against enemies, who often outmatched them in firepower and protection. They won through discipline, teamwork, and tactical innovation developed under fire. They won because they adapted faster than their enemies and learned from every engagement. The flanking tactics that let Shermans destroy heavy armor from the side represent one of the most important tactical innovations of the Prace War. These techniques did not come from training manuals. They came from men who learned what worked by watching their friends die when other methods failed. Every Sherman crew that maneuvered around a Panther to hit its flank was executing a solution paid for in blood. The Tiger was the best tank in any individual engagement. The Sherman was part of the best army in the war. One measure determined victory in battle. The other determined victory in war. That distinction decided everything.